Okay, so let's see what Alex O'Connor says. Alex O'Connor is this British, he's a young intellectual over there, and he talks a lot about God and stuff. I think he's an atheist, or not quite sure. Maybe he's agnostic. I'm not sure, but let's hear him out.
That after the birth of Jesus, the family fled to Egypt. Matthew says that they went to the Jerusalem temple. Are they both correct, or is one of them wrong?
Who the heck cares? I mean, look.
Well, I do, and so
well,
does
you
probably
do,
the
but,
people
but,
who
but,
are
but
listening
let
to
me
a debate about
say,
what the
let me
Bible
say,
Wait, let's hear it again.
Luke says that after the birth of Jesus, the family fled to Egypt. Matthew says that they went to the Jerusalem temple. Are they both correct, or is one of them wrong?
Well, maybe he went to the Jerusalem temple and then they fled to Egypt. Is that possible, Mr. Alex O'Connor? Is that not possible? What is this guy trying to say?
who the heck cares? I mean, look.
Well, I do, and so
well,
does
you
probably
do,
the people who are listening to a debate about what the Bible is true.
Let me say why what you care about is not only trivial, but indicates a kind of unwillingness to try to get what the text is trying to communicate.
I'll tell you why I don't think it's trivial. Because I think that the
No, you see what this guy's saying, this Indian guy, I forget his name now, but this guy's trying to say that, oh, don't worry about those little things, don't worry about if it seems like there's a contradiction. It's just like you just have to accept the book for what it is and just don't worry about those little things, right? But that's not the way we should think of it. O'Connor's right in that there should be no contradiction. But what he's wrong about is that there is no contradiction, okay? Matthew says that Jesus, after he was born, 8 days later, they went to the temple. Okay, fine, fair enough. And then I think actually after 30 days, they went back, So, okay, so those things happen. And then Luke says that they went to Egypt, which also Matthew also says. So it was after that, We can look at the scripture in a minute, but let's hear them out.
Reason why Luke may have invented the flight to Egypt, but he tells us. Luke says when he records.
Hold on. Luke didn't invent the flight to Egypt. Matthew talks about the flight to Egypt too. Matthew certainly does refer to and discuss the flight to Egypt. For example, in Matthew, I think 23 or something like that, or chapter 1, verse 23, right? So the idea, I don't know what this guy Alex O'Connor is trying to say, but the idea that Matthew never mentioned the flight to Egypt or something is absolutely absurd and ridiculous, okay? So don't listen to these people.
Luke may have invented the flight to Egypt, but he tells us. Luke says, when he records the flight to Egypt, and then they return from Egypt, he says, this is so that we can fulfill the prophecy from Hosea chapter 11, out of Egypt I shall call my...
Oh, okay. So now this guy's not telling you right. So when he says out of Egypt I shall call my son, that's in Matthew. Okay, so I guess what he's really trying to say is that Luke doesn't mention the flight to Egypt. That's what he's trying to really say, okay? Because Matthew certainly does mention it, absolutely does. And it's true enough that Luke doesn't really discuss it, but actually, let me see this. Hold on a sec. Yeah. So it's true enough. Yeah, Luke doesn't really discuss the flight to Egypt exactly. But again, like he was saying, Matthew does talk about how they went to the temple and stuff, right? So, or maybe that is Luke. So, okay, so he's just talking about Luke. So O'Connor just mixed up Matthew and Luke. That's what he did. So Luke doesn't really talk about the flight to Egypt. Matthew talks about the flight to Egypt. And where he's quoting right now, he's saying how Luke quoted Hosea. That's not true. It's Matthew who quoted Hosea, and I think Matthew chapter 1, verse 23.
My son. Luke says, when he records the flight to Egypt, and then they return from Egypt, he says, this is so that we can fulfill the prophecy from Hosea chapter 11, out of Egypt I shall call my son. Now, in Hosea, God is talking here about the nation of Israel. At least in this case, unlike the Matthew prophecy, the prophecy actually exists and we can interrogate it. It seems to me like what Luke is doing here is attempting to display Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. And in fact, he tells us that that's what he's doing. Therefore, if it is the case that Jesus didn't go to Egypt and didn't come out of Egypt on his return, then this would undermine Luke's attempts to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. That's why I think it is relevant.
Well, Look,
and not trivial.
right, but I think that
Would you agree with that? I mean, do you think it's a completely trivial point? If it's so
no,
trivial,
I think that the point,
then why
as
is
you
it included in the first?
No, it's not trivial. It's just that like one person doesn't talk about it. That doesn't mean it never happened. He just doesn't mention it. He doesn't feel like it's necessary for the narrative. Luke's narrative doesn't feel the need to include the whole episode with Egypt. He doesn't feel the need to do that. There's no need to include it. He goes straight from the thing in the temple. He goes straight from that to the thing when Jesus was 12 years old and they went to the temple and then they were leaving and he was staying talking to the doctors. That's what Luke goes to after the temple story. And Matthew talks about, okay, they were in the they were visited by the wise men. All right. Then the wise men left, and then God told them to go away. And then God told them to go to Egypt, Joseph and them. And so they went. And Luke doesn't talk about that. Luke doesn't talk about Herod killing the children either. Luke doesn't talk about the wise men. He doesn't talk about the story Luke doesn't talk about lots of things that Matthew talks about. Matthew talks about his things. Luke talks about his things. And Mark talks about his things, But there's no contradiction. There's no contradiction. They're just telling different parts of the story. That's it.
the point, as you stated it before, is trivial. The point you're now raising is not trivial, but the point you're now raising is one in which you have 3 centuries of Jewish Christian disputation about whether Jesus is the Messiah, okay? And by and large, the disputation breaks down in this way. The Jews are the biblical literalists, and the Christians are the sort of metaphorical readers. And I say this because let's take a very famous passage that bears on this very topic, where Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. And the Jews go, you said the temple would be destroyed. Now, interestingly, Jesus did say the temple would be destroyed, and the temple was in fact destroyed in 70 AD. In fact, 40 years after Jesus said that, the temple was in fact physically razed to the ground, and the Jews dispersed in a huge diaspora. But my point is, Jesus doesn't reply that. Jesus doesn't say, hey, listen, wait 40 years. Jesus says, no, you're misreading me completely. When I said the temple, I was actually speaking of the temple of my body.
He doesn't tell them that.
But this is stated.
We're told that that's what he means.
We're told that's what he means. So what I'm getting at is, here you have a case where you have an event, you have a Jewish literalist reading and a Christian metaphorical reading.
Yeah.
Another example, and
So would you say then the flight to Egypt is a metaphor? Is that what you're trying to say? In other words, I'm trying
Wait,
to.
I don't understand. Wait. What's going on here? Like, I don't know. Like, I think this guy's like one of these liberals, this Indian guy. So he's like trying to say that we're supposed to read some kind of like metaphorical or symbolic truth in the Bible. And so the fact that there's this, or he's basically, I think what he's doing is basically admitting that there's a contradiction, quote unquote, which there is not. And he's saying that, well, we don't read the Bible literally the way the Jews do. We read it more metaphorically or something like that. But we don't. We read it literally. That's what we do. We're evangelicals. We're not liberals. Okay? And so that's wrong. That's not the truth.
Understand what it is that you're doing here to actually answer the question that I'm asking you, which is about, because here's my theory. Here's an idea.
okay.
Luke, the author of Luke, invents the flight to Egypt in order to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. Meaning that when we read Luke, we should note that where it appears that he's making historical claims, we should note his willingness to twist history in order to fulfill a theological
Well, you don't know
aim.
if he's doing that. You're assuming that. This is your theory.
No. What I'm saying is that that's one thesis to explain the contradiction between Luke and Matthew. If you want to say that it's trivial, then fine. But
Okay, once again, there's no contradiction. All right? There is no contradiction whatsoever. All right? It's just the fact that Matthew is just simply telling a different part of the story. That's all it is. Luke just didn't happen to include the thing about Egypt. He just didn't, it wasn't important to his story that he was telling. That's all it is. Okay? There's no contradiction whatsoever. None.
we still have to explain how it comes about. And what I'm saying is one idea of how this comes about leads to us undermining our trustworthiness.
You know what the other thing is? in Matthew, right? They talk about the wise men. The wise men come, right? And then they leave the gifts, and then they leave, and then he goes to Egypt. Okay. So the whole thing of the wise men coming, how long did that take? We don't know, right? Now, just like they were in Jerusalem, and then I guess Jesus and them were in Bethlehem, and then they came back. Maybe they came back to Nazareth or something like that. Probably seems like it, right? So that's where the wise men saw them. So it could have been a week later or a month later or what have you. We don't really know. Okay. So it could have been, and the whole thing of like what Matthew tells about is like, okay, I mean, what Luke tells about is that, okay, after 8 days, then they got him circumcised. Then after 30 days, then Mary went and she got the purification thing. Okay. So that takes 1 month. All right. It might have been a month or two before the wise men came. And then after that, that's when they left. That's all it is, man. It's nothing, no big deal. Nothing.
Luke, what I'm asking you for is your explanation that would not lead to us having to undermine our the trustworthiness of Luke.
I don't have the ability to referee that passage. I'm not aware of this contradiction. I'll have to go back and look and
Sure,
see.
that's fine.
Go
that's
and
fine
go and
too.
look it up. But what I am doing is I'm questioning your methodology and your kind of what would I call it? You got the Jews and the Christians arguing about events, and they're very complex events, and they're very powerfully meaningful events. Like, let's take, for example, Abraham and Isaac are going up the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And Isaac says to Abraham something to the effect of, where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says to him, God will provide. God will provide. Now, in the Jewish reading, this whole thing has got to be understood in terms of, here's Abraham, he's willing to sacrifice his son. God says, stop. It's a tale of obedience. In the Christian reading, it's not that, or it's not only that. The Christian reading is, Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So when Isaac says, where's the lamb? And Abraham says, God will provide, it is a foreshadowing of a significant event in the New Testament. Now, again, as I say, the Jews and the Christians argued this for 3 centuries and more. I'm not even trying to adjudicate who's right, but I'm saying you're waltzing in, coming with neither of these two assumptions. In fact, I assume you think that the Old Testament is as mythological as the New.
No.
Okay.
Sorry, that I need to.
And I guess what I'm saying is that people who read the Bible.
So wait, did you hear what he just said? He said, "Oh, the Old Testament is as mythological as the New," or something like that. What did he say? What?
I'm saying you're waltzing in, coming with neither of these two assumptions. In fact, I assume you think that the Old Testament is as mythological as the New.
No.
Okay.
Sorry, that I need to.
And I guess what I'm saying.
Wait, mythological? What is this guy trying to say? I don't like this guy, this Indian guy.
Thing is that people who read the Bible to understand what the Bible is trying to say and what we can learn from it, do what the Jewish rabbis did and do what theologians like Augustine and Anselm and so many others have done. They don't really do what you're doing, which is saying, hey, Luke must have talked to a guy who thought it happened over here, but in fact, this guy says the roof was thatched, but another guy says they let the guy in through the roof who had to be healed. Contradiction. Yeah. And I'm like, is this your way of trying to say the Bible is not true?
Yes, it is. The Old
Testament.
Yes.
Okay.
It's precisely what I'm doing. The Old Testament is not fully mythological. I think Genesis is mythological. I think that Exodus makes more of an attempt at history, but has mythological undertones. I think that the military conquests I mentioned in my opening statements are attempts at describing literal historical events. I think that
agree.
Psalms are poetry. I think that Job is mythology. I don't think a man called Job actually existed, right? And so there are lots of different.
I agree.
Here.
I agree. Did you hear what this guy just said? This is who's representing us. This guy. I agree. Job was mythological. Shut up, idiot. How dare you? How dare you represent us?
The reason I'm asking about the contradictions in the gospel, and I understand if you don't want to talk about the specific example of Egypt and Jerusalem, fine, whatever. Maybe you can send me an email about it later or something. That's fine. But the reason I bring it up is to say that there are lots of these. And in each case, if we try to look
There's not lots of these, and this is the thing. This is why this is dumb, and it's almost like these two are. I mean, obviously these two are both shills, right? So, like, if this guy is supposed to be like a highly educated, really on the ball, critical thinker type of guy who, like, you know, he's the pride of England's intellectual class and all this stuff, right? But he can't do like the most basic work to find out. Like okay, let's say you have this view that there's some contradiction between Matthew and Luke, right? So, and you want to bring it to the Christian and debate him about it, right? Wouldn't you, at the very least, like type that into Google and say, "Hey, what do Christian apologists say about this thing?" Wouldn't you do that? Isn't that like the most basic thing you could do? Because Christian apologists have certainly dealt with this objection, like all these other foolish objections that these people come up with. It doesn't take very long to find out what's the problem here, you know? Dinesh D'Souza, yeah, thanks. That was his name. I forgot. Thanks for the review. Is he dead? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
Look at why they might be contradicting each other, the reasons I think we're given tell us that the historicity of this text should be in dispute. For example, I mentioned the date of Jesus' death. The Synoptic Gospels specifically place this after the Passover meal. They have the Last Supper as the Passover meal.
Okay.
John tell us they might be contradicting. There are lots of these. And in each case, if we try to look at why they might be contradicting each other, the reasons I think we're given tell us that the historicity of this text should be in dispute. For example, I mentioned the date of Jesus' death. The Synoptic Gospels specifically place this after the Passover meal. They have the Last Supper as the Passover meal.
Okay.
John uniquely sets it before the Passover because he has the theological purpose of wanting to depict Jesus as the Passover lamb.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a contradiction if the Gospels are supposed to be historical accounts of what happened to Jesus, which I imagine if we were having a debate about whether Christianity were true, about whether the God of the Bible existed, you might put forward, say, an argument for the resurrection of Jesus. You might say, well, we have good historical evidence to think that Jesus rose from the dead, and you might point to the story of the crucifixion and the disciples seeing him after he died. This is a common thread. The problem is that if we're treating it as historical in an area like that, then we have to engage with it as a historical text. Why would they contradict each other? I would say for the same reason that Luke contradicts Matthew in the birth narratives, because they're attempting to make a theological point, which tells us at least, and maybe you think that the New Testament is an entirely theological and in no way a historical text. Would you agree at least that the New Testament writers are seemingly willing to adapt the historicity of an event in order to serve a theological point? Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I would agree that.
Well,
I
that
mean,
definitely is a contradiction.
Well, it's not a contradiction because, well, I mean, Thucydides is relaying historical events to make a moral point about the nature of politics, and both are completely consistent with each other.
Sure.
It's not as if Thucydides is, so he's a student of power politics. He is making a point. His speeches are driven at making a point, but the point is excavated out of the actual events. Now, I think that there's a reason that we're given 4 perspectival accounts of Jesus's life, and they're not identical. In fact, as I say,
I just want to say before you go on anywhere, I'm not really sure that from the text you can actually make the claim that John is putting it before the Passover, because it says before the feast of the Passover, but like I think it's saying that like right before, I don't think he's saying before, like the day before or anything. But let's hear it out, and then we'll check it out at the we'll check out the Bible.
if they were identical, you wouldn't need 4. The point of reading these, and I think the way to read them. Let me say a word. If you want.
Oh, I said the nation state of Israel. I mean, maybe I said Israel in my comments, but if you believe, like, listen to the whole discussion there, I was saying that the nation state of Israel does not have a right to exist. That's my opinion. So I support a one-state solution for the region. Okay, if you have any questions about that, I can answer them. Okay, but that's what I was saying. I'm not trying to say that the people of Israel don't deserve to exist. I'm not saying anything like that. Obviously, I love all people. I love the Jews. I have no hatred towards the Jews or anything. Okay.
To determine veracity, you have to operate a little bit like a jury. And by that I mean, pick up the Gospel of Mark, the first of the Gospels. Now, by the way, these Gospels are written very proximate to the events they describe. And I say this by the standards of, we're talking about historicity of any historical document.
70 AD, would you say, for Mark?
Yes, I mean, I would say within decades of the events that they describe.
But
yes.
crucially, would you agree with most historians that this happened, for example, after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, thereby allowing the author of Mark to put the prediction in the words of Jesus' mouth without it being anything miraculous?
This is a highly debated point because Mark's gospel leaves off incomplete and has what seems to be at the very end an added section. I don't want to debate that little fragment of Mark. Here's what I'm getting at. If you've never read the Bible, and we've all read.
Listen, man, this guy Alex O'Connor. Anyway, this guy's like not very good at defending the Bible. I don't know why they picked this guy. This guy's he's not some expert in Christianity. I don't know what he is an expert in. I think he's some kind of political guy more than anything else. I don't really know too much about this guy, but I don't think he's very knowledgeable about Christianity. He's a Christian or something like that, or supposedly, but you know.
Read the Bible in a way. I was raised Catholic, and so I was habituated.
Yeah. Well, they've been for the two-state solution for so long. Nothing. It's never gonna happen. It's never gonna happen. So if you have one state, make the whole thing into one state, and just okay. I'm not saying we have to kick out all the Jews because that's insane now, right? There's so many of them there now. It's just ridiculous, right? But we're in this situation. So I'm saying, let's have one state and just have the people. Then the people that live there, okay, they can be self-determining people who have a vote and whatever. And unfortunately, yeah, I guess that means that Israel or the Jews are going to be outnumbered by Palestinians, and maybe the votes won't go their way. Maybe they won't like the politics as it pans out there, and maybe they have to leave. But I'm just saying, what they're doing right now is clearly genocide, and so that's why I don't support it.
Waited to go into Sunday Mass and sort of felt like I didn't know the Bible. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've heard these stories read and so on. But it was a completely different experience for me as an adult to go back with critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through. It has the complete ring of authenticity. And I say this because not only does it give you little details that don't really seem to even belong there. It's clearly not written with a polemical purpose exclusively. Mark will tell you things that not only seem irrelevant, but at other times undermine what he's trying to say. And that is the true ring of authenticity. Because if someone were to... What's that?
An example?
Well, here's an example. In the Jewish tradition, the testimony of a woman was considered inherently suspect, but the testimony of men generally reliable. And therefore, not that the testimony of women is disregarded altogether, but you needed, for example, many women to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now,
I think a lot of the Palestinians would accept it. I don't know about I mean, I think their leaders are very shilly and probably connected to Israel too. So it's very difficult to know what the leaders want because they keep pushing this two-state solution that's never going to work, you know? But when it comes to the one state, I think a lot of the people would be okay with it, but obviously the Israelis would not, most of them. But it's like the only thing that's kind of reasonable. Like, I don't think the two-state solution is reasonable. It's just like you're going to give them this little section, and then as long as you have the two-state solution, right? It's just allows them to keep kicking the can down the road, and then they're going to have more and more of this situation where they're slowly creeping in on destroying Gaza. Gaza is destroyed now anyway. Gaza is finished. Gaza is done, and they keep building the settlements in the West Bank. So eventually these people are going to be pushed out. That's what's going to happen, right? So that's why they do the two-state solution. The two-state solution is just a way for Israel to continue its program of genocide until they have completely removed all the Palestinians, and then they have their state.
that when Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb, if I were Mark and I were Luke and I were trying to be inventive and I were trying to establish a truth for posterity, I would not have it
Hey, what's up,
that
buddy?
a group of, let's just say, hysterical women, Mary Magdalene, whoever it was, a group
I
of women.
haven't reacted to it yet. We might do it today. I don't know. We'll see. Probably I will, because somebody was asking about Romans 10, so that'd be good.
Go to the tomb, and they are the ones who find the tomb empty. This is like a little dubious, because most people are going to go, well, yeah, we know, but women, you know. So here's an example of the Gospels insisting upon a point that would only make sense if that was actually the way it happened.
Allow me to answer that. If I
You can see this guy. You see this guy doesn't know what he's doing. This guy Dinesh D'Souza. Because look, this is what happened there. He says Mark does all these things that that they almost go against his point, so therefore he wouldn't do it. So that's the ring of authenticity. But then he brings up the example of the women finding Jesus's tomb empty, right? So that's an example we see in all of the gospel accounts. And that's always brought up. That's always brought up by apologists of Christianity to say, hey, this is an example of why we should believe this story. It's authentic because normally people who are trying to tell you some story, they won't bring in these things that kind of detract from their story. Like women were not considered to be plausible witnesses to anything back then. So if you wanted to tell people a story in a way that they'll believe it, you wouldn't make the women to be the first witnesses of the empty tomb. Okay, so that's the idea there. But the thing is, these people like Alex O'Connor, they've heard that a million times, so they know exactly what to say. So that's why if you're gonna go up against somebody like this, you have to know what he's gonna say and then know what to reply, right? But this fool Dinesh D'Souza, he doesn't know one thing. He's like, oh yeah, Mark has tons of this stuff. No, like they all have that. It's just like, so why would you even bring that up? That's not a good example. If you're trying to show the Mark thing, Mark specifically has all these things, you know. So anyway, I'm just pointing out that Dinesh D'Souza is completely out of his league in this debate, and he was the wrong person to choose for this thing.
If I may,
Go ahead.
if I may, this is a commonly presented argument for the historicity of the resurrection, which, by the way, now we're talking as
Well, I'm not. No, sir, no, hold on. I didn't
hold
say
on.
it's an
Let
argument
me-
for the
let me-
historicity of the resurrection. I said it was an
Dinesh.
argument.
Let me say a word.
Okay.
Now we're talking about these texts if they are historical texts. The thing about the women is, look, this is quite straightforward to me. Who anoints bodies? Who goes to tombs and anoints bodies after someone dies? It's not men, it's women. And so if the authors of the Gospels had the men go to the tomb to anoint the body, which is what Mary and the other women were doing when they went to the tomb, that itself would be very strange and give us reason to doubt the historicity of the event. In other words, it's like if there's a task that women do, and that task is how Jesus's empty tomb is discovered, then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you said that you need multiple women's testimony.
Okay, so that's his response to that, and I've never really thought of that as some great evidence, but so that's the thing that people will often bring up as evidence of the historicity of the gospel accounts. The fact that all the writers tell us that it was the women who discovered the empty tomb. It's like that's considered to be evidence that they weren't trying to cook up some story, because if they were trying to cook up some story, they wouldn't tell it that way. They would tell it like some kind of male witnesses, so it's like legit, right? But then he's saying like that's stupid because obviously women are the ones that anoint bodies, so therefore whatever, but it's like I mean would they make up a story? I don't know. It's weird. Anyway, whatever. So he's saying that that's not good evidence, and fine, whatever. That's not. You don't need that to show. The New Testament is very good. Is very good historical documentation. Okay, it's very good. There's no reason to like just doubt people's stories. You need some evidence more for us to think that we should doubt the story. You know what I mean? Now, people like this, they'll say, "Oh, it's because they're religious fanatics and they wanted to start a cult, and so that's why they made up a story." And so people like this will believe that, But there's once again, like, there's no reason to look. If they just made up this story, right? They made up the story of the resurrection. It's just absurd because, first of all, why would they write these books? Like, why? Like, if it was just made up, it's just made up, right? Why would you write a book? You know how expensive it is to make a book back then? A book back then to write, just to write the thing would be so expensive, okay? But then publish it and get it out to as many people as you can, that's also expensive, very expensive. Like way more than most people could afford. Most people cannot afford ever to even buy a book, let alone produce a book and sell it. That would be ridiculous for most people. Okay, so the fact that those books even exist is good evidence, especially so soon after he died. Like, back then, like, people, like great people, like Alexander the Great, for instance. Alexander the Great conquered that whole region. He was the greatest general in human history. Okay, but the very first biography we have of Alexander is almost 400 years after he died. Okay, whereas Jesus, that's only 400 years after he died, the greatest conqueror of his time, or even up to today. Okay, but then when we look at Jesus's story, even though he didn't conquer anything, even though he was penniless, even though he never wrote a book or anything, nothing. For some reason, there's 4 biographies of him, 4. Okay, and they're all written like within, like, I mean, people will dispute it, but certainly within like 70, 80 years of his death. That's insane. Nobody in human history has ever received that kind of documentation in the ancient world or anything like it. You know what I mean? So that's another good reason to think like it must be true or something happened that's very special.
Women go to the tomb, multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately? Do, and that task is how Jesus's empty tomb is discovered. Then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you've said that you need multiple women's testimony. How many women go to the tomb? Multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately after seeing the empty tomb? They run and tell the men who come and verify it for us. Right. So I don't think that this is this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that
that's what they call it. That's what they call it. The criterion of embarrassment. Okay. So in ancient times, it was very unlikely that somebody would write into a book anything that would embarrass them. And so that story that Jesus was found by women, that his empty tomb was found by women, that's considered to be embarrassing or somehow like would lower the plausibility of the story. So that's why they call it that. They call when you see those type of things in a historical document and that you're using that as some kind of argument for why the story is plausible, then they call that the criterion of embarrassment. Okay.
Right. So I don't think that this is this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that if this was an invented story, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but if it were, then of course we could expect the people who discover the empty tomb to be women, because it's women who go to anoint the body at the tomb.
Okay, so let's put together what I just said and you just said, and let's ask the question, based upon what you said and what I said, did it happen that way? And I would submit that what you have done, see, you're doing special pleadings. You could argue I'm doing special pleadings, but I would admit that the thrust of the Bible and the thrust of the story is in fact aimed at delivering a truth from Revelation.
That's fine.
What you're
okay, look, special pleading is when you try to reach for something for your argument, to save your argument, which is getting like debunked, right? You come up with something to kind of make it true anyway, something that normally we wouldn't give that to an argument. We wouldn't just allow them something like that to just reach like that. So that's what they call special pleading. So for example, somebody might say, you shouldn't be allowed to cut your hair because you'll look like you'll look like a weirdo, right? And you go like, yeah, but you know, I don't know. Anyway, special pleading. Look it up. Look, that's not what these people are doing. Like, I mean, certainly Alex O'Connor did not do a special pleading, but I would say actually Dinesh D'Souza is doing special pleading. So let me show you what he's doing. I'll give you the example.
I would admit that the thrust of the Bible,
Hang on.
did it happen that way? And I would submit that what you have done, see, you're doing special pleadings. You could argue I'm doing special pleadings, but I would admit that the thrust of the Bible and the thrust of the story is in fact aimed at delivering a truth from revelation.
That's fine.
Okay, so that's special pleading. All right. That's like he has no evidence for what he's saying, right? He's just saying, I would argue that the Bible is written for some kind of truth. It's true. It's a true story for some reason. He doesn't give any reason, doesn't give any evidence, right? That's what you call special pleading. All right. It's okay. It's okay. Jesus loves me. I'll get to your question right after this video. All right. No, it's fine. You can type as many questions as you like. But yeah, so that's what special pleading is. All right. When they just come up with something just to save the argument. There's no reason. What he just said is like, oh, I would argue that the Bible is told from a stance of truth or something like that, right? It's like, why? Why would you argue that? What's the evidence for that? You know? So I mean, I would argue the same thing, but I would give evidence. I wouldn't just say that. So what he's doing is special pleading. Alex O'Connor, he says, oh, that's fine. It's so dumb. Like, I don't know. Both these two are like idiots.
The story is in fact aimed at delivering a truth from revelation.
That's fine.
What you're trying to do is saying, all right, I can't contest that because that.
Well, it's not that. Look, special pleading is part of like arguments, and it's a fallacy, basically. Okay, but backloading is something unique to soteriology of OSAS free gracers and stuff. I'll talk to you about it in a minute. Okay.
It's outside the domain of reason. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt sort of the nitpicking strategy. And because we got 4 accounts, I'm going to
hold on. You're the one who brought that up. You're the one who said that
I did.
Women discovering.
And I'm saying nothing you've said has even slightly refuted it.
You don't think anything I just said refuted the idea that
What? Like, it's so dumb. This guy's so incompetent and dumb. What Alex just said clearly is a valid objection. I'm not saying he completely refuted the argument that D'Souza brought up, which D'Souza was saying the thing about the women found the tomb, and that's like a criterion of embarrassment. And now he's saying like Alex O'Connor didn't come up with any kind of valid refutation. But what Alex said is valid. Like I mean, it's not like there's nothing you can say to respond to it, but you should not respond by just saying, oh, nothing you said is valid. No, what he said is a valid objection. Okay. It's absolutely very reasonable what he said. And you should have a response to that, you stupid idiot, Dinesh D'Souza.
Nothing you've said has even slightly refuted it.
you don't think anything I just said refuted the idea that would be something you wouldn't expect from the gospel authors if it were invented?
No, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I mean, let's look at what we agree on, what we disagree on. You agree that in that culture, the testimony of women in general counts for less.
I think this is something that Josephus tells us, but it's impossible to know what sort of culturally people actually thought at the time. It's impossible for us to know, but I'm happy to grant it. Yeah, sure.
It's impossible for us to know, even though Josephus says it. Okay,
well, that's in a court of law, right?
No, but what I'm saying is,
yeah, that's true. That's true. There's some evidence that like the women were not allowed to testify in courts. Okay. Now, whether that was something that occurred in the Old Testament, I highly doubt that. But whatever, let's just say that. Like, what I highly doubt it. Actually, I don't believe that. That's not the case for the Old Testament, or maybe. Well, we don't really know, but I don't think it is. It doesn't say anything like that in the book, so there's no reason to believe it, right? But there's some evidence from Josephus and I think some other writers that by the time of the New Testament. Josephus is from that period, right? So by that time, it seems like the Hebrews or the Jews, when they had their courts, they wouldn't allow women to testify. It seems like, but once again, there's not that much evidence. But Josephus is pretty reliable evidence, but I don't think there's very much. But anyway, let's see what they're saying.
if you're applying the is it impossible for us to know, I would suggest to you it is impossible for us to know that it was the absolute and unwavering duty of women to provide all the ointments. You stated that as a fact.
No,
I would say it's impossible for us to know.
What I'm saying is that if somebody's reading this text and you say, well,
okay, so now this is just saying that we don't know who put the anointing on the bodies. We don't know, right? You're like O'Connor was saying that, oh, it's only women would do that. So of course they would write that as women doing it, of course, because that would only make sense. And then D'Souza's saying, well, we don't know that. And so now that's kind of a valid objection to what he's saying, but that's the first time he brought it up. So before, when he was saying that nothing Alex said is reasonable, like he never said anything to object to it.
It's impossible for us to know.
What I'm saying is that if somebody's reading this text and you say, well, if this were invented, why would it be women who discover the tomb? That would be embarrassing for them, the so-called embarrassment criterion. I'm saying, would it not be just, is not the fact that we're told why they're going to the tomb to anoint the body, is this not just reason enough?
No.
I mean, look, I'm not the one claiming.
I don't know. Is it true that the women are the only ones who anoint the body? Because in John, which Alex O'Connor might question John or something like that, because that's how they are. But in John, it talks about how Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, how they went, and the women were there too, but they were the ones that brought the spices and stuff, right? So I don't know.
I know how this went down, by the way. And also, you just accused me a second ago of special pleading. I wanted to ask you what it was that I'm specially pleading.
Well, what I'm
saying, that's true. That's true too. Because, and I'm glad Alex brought it up finally. Because Dinesh D'Souza said that they're both special pleading, but in fact, O'Connor is not special pleading, but this guy is.
Accused me a second ago of special pleading. I wanted to ask you what it was that I'm specially pleading.
Well, what I'm saying is that you have an event.
Mm-hmm.
These events are described with great precision and a sort of eyewitness presence there. Now, we know in some cases there weren't eyewitnesses, but they're nevertheless described. This is the way it happened.
See, these guys are shills, man. Like, see how he did his glasses like that? Now, people are going to say, oh, Mike, man, he's just adjusting his glasses. But look, these guys are both shills. Why did they bring this incompetent fool to defend the Bible? Why did they bring this guy? This guy's not a Bible defender guy. He's not an apologist. He doesn't know that much about the Bible. He's not a Bible expert. Who is this guy? He's just some random American political guy or something. I think he was like a speechwriter or something like that. I don't know who cares about this guy. Why did they bring this guy? But this is what they'll do. They'll have Alex O'Connor talking with this fool or like Jordan Peterson or whatever. These people that don't know how to defend the Bible, they don't even really care to that well. He's a liberal. This guy's a liberal. This guy's talking about how Genesis is a myth and all this stuff. A bunch of foolishness.
And 4 guys are telling you their point of view, right?
Yeah. None of them the women who actually discovered the tomb, by the way.
No, you're not hearing from the women. I agree. You're 4 male gospel writers, apparently. Now, I lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry.
I also don't want to get too caught up on this specific example, but I suppose we'll have to sort of leave it with the audience in the live stream. The point that I'm trying to make is that the historicity of at least some of this is important.
See how they do that thing. They do that thing, man. They do that thing a lot. And these guys, people think, oh, they're not doing hand signs, Mike, but they are.
To make is that the historicity of at least some of this is important for Christianity. The historicity of the life of Jesus. Like if it were discovered historically speaking that a man called Jesus never existed.
He was saying something like that, River. I'm not really sure exactly what he said, but something along those lines. He was saying some weird stuff like that, you know? He's trying to say that, like, oh, the Jews have a literal reading and we don't have this literal reading. We read it more metaphorically or whatever. It's like that kind of attitude, but he hasn't really openly said it fully. But or maybe he has. I might have missed it, but I would say almost definitely that he's some kind of like liberal theology, if you know what that means. Liberal theology is when people don't think the Bible is necessarily authoritative. Okay. Liberal theology. So most of the mainstream denominations of Protestantism are kind of liberal in that sense, you know, although they have other evangelicals as well, but they'll have liberals as well.
completely undermine Christianity.
Are you
That's
saying that?
important. No, I'm not saying that. Of
Okay,
course I'm not saying
let me
that.
ask you a different
I'm saying
question.
that, I'm saying that historically it matters. The crucifixion, the resurrection, these are matters which historically matter to Christians. And so when we're dealing with a historical account of what happened, when they're riddled with contradictions, I think that that's a problem. If you don't think that's a problem, then that's fine.
See
But I think
that?
that
See
people
that?
live with contradictions.
Why is this guy doing this? Why is this guy doing this? I'm riddled with contradictions, man.
I think that that's a problem. If you don't think that's a problem, then that's fine. But I think that the people listening and wanting to find out if the Bible is true might see that as reason to undermine the trust of the text.
First of all, almost everything that we know about those events in terms of modern historical reliability, for example, where is the site of Jesus's crucifixion?
Nah, actually, we don't. We don't. Jetastic belief. We come to belief. We come to belief when God draws us. Okay. Or you can see, for example, John 6:44. Or you can also read Matthew 16. I think it's like 17 or something, where Jesus tells Peter that blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood has not revealed this unto you, but my Father which is in heaven. So the Father has to reveal Jesus to us, okay?
Fiction. Unknown.
Allegedly,
Disputed. There are a couple of potential sites, but it's not known. What day of the year was Jesus born? Unknown. We think Jesus lived for 33 years, but let's say that one of the Gospels said it was 33 and the other one said it was 34. Do you think that would actually refute Christianity?
No.
It would not.
No.
It would.
No. You can't lose your salvation, River Eagle. You cannot lose your salvation under any circumstances. Once you believe in Jesus Christ, you have everlasting life. You will never die. So I'm not sure what exactly you're asking me about, what it's in relation to what I said, but it's okay. You make a choice to believe in Jesus, even if once saved, always saved. You believed in to be saved, you did. No, that's what I'm saying to you. You don't choose to believe things. Just like you didn't. Did you choose to believe that you're watching my live stream, typing comments in? Did you choose to believe that, or do you believe it because there's evidence that leads you to that belief? You know, could you choose to believe something else? You know, you could tell yourself, "Oh, I choose to believe something else," but you won't really, right? Because you know that you're actually watching my live stream and typing comments. So we don't really choose to believe things. We believe things because they're true, because of the evidence. There's a difference between belief and knowing. Yeah, I do believe there's a difference between belief and knowing. But knowing is a belief, right? Like knowing is like justified true belief, as Plato would put it, right? Justified true belief. That is, belief is something that you just believe, but knowledge is something that's true that you believe. And it's also something that you have some reason to believe it, some evidence. That's what we call knowledge. That's the difference between knowledge and just faith. Okay? But belief is not something we choose. Okay, whatever, dude. Anyway, moving on.
It would actually be quite understandable that you'd have two guys. And they would get that and they'd be off on that, and this contradiction would be two guys.
What is this guy talking about?
But it's not known. What day of the year was Jesus born? Unknown. We think Jesus lived for 33 years, but let's say that one of the Gospels said it was 33 and the other one said it was 34.
33 years, bro. I know people do say that. I don't know, maybe.
Say that one of the Gospels said it was 33 and the other one said it was 34. Do you think that would actually refute Christianity?
No.
It would not. It would actually be quite understandable that you'd have two guys. And they would get that and they'd be off on that, and this contradiction would be trivial because the issue is not whether Jesus lived for 33 or 34 years old.
Right, that's a different kind. Because if you could tell me that the reason why they had specifically chosen those ages was to serve a theological
doing it again. See that? Why do that? What does that have to do with what you're saying, bro?
Point, knowing that they're willing to sort of adapt history in order to make a theological point. I wouldn't say that point alone undermines Christianity. What I would say is that it undermines our trustworthiness in the Bible. I'm not saying that any one of these contradictions can tell us Christianity is false.
No, but I'm saying
firstly, the question is not if Christianity is true, it's whether the Bible is true. It may be the case that a man called Jesus came down to earth, rose from the dead. It's just that the gospel accounts get the details wrong, which mean that the Bible is not correct, but the
No,
story
it
the
doesn't
Bible
mean that.
tells is true. It
Look,
means that Christianity is true, but the Bible is false. That's perfectly consistent.
I'm simply,
I'm
I'm
not saying
simply
that.
saying that what you're
it's perfectly consistent that that Christianity is true, but the Bible's false. It's perfectly consistent, guys. You know. That
doing is you are supplying a motive that is completely.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with that too. That's true. That's why I think there is something, because that's the difference between faith and knowledge. Because knowledge, I mean, according to the sort of Platonic view of it, like it's classically been thought of as justified true belief. All right. So if you believe something that's untrue, you believe it, but it's not knowledge, because knowledge is something that's actually true. So if you believe that the sky is red, that's your belief. That's fine, but that's not knowledge. Okay. If you believe the sky is blue, that's okay. But unless you have a good reason to believe it, it's not really knowledge either. If you just happen to believe this thing, but you have no reason to, you just believe it, that's not knowledge. But if you believe the sky is blue because you looked out your window and you saw that the sky is blue, then you have a reason to believe it, then that's not what we would consider knowledge. Okay? And then there's other things you might believe which are not necessarily which other people might not consider them knowledge. You know, I would consider it knowledge that you believe that Jesus is the Christ, right? Because you do have reasons to believe it as well. And so it is slightly different. You're right. It's very different. The idea of believing something that's right in front of you and believing something like Jesus, but it's not that different anyway. But it is knowledge too. Anyway, we'll talk about that some more maybe. This kind of
made up, and that I could engage in exactly. Let's just take, for example, the 33 versus the 34 years. Now, here's what I'm saying. If there was such a contradiction and I were being you, I would say, oh, the reason that Matthew said it was 33 is because 3 is the number of the Trinity. And so 33 has a...
I sympathize with this Jesus loves. We'll talk about this too.
certain theological versus the 34 years. Now, here's what I'm saying. If there was such a contradiction and I were being you, I would say, oh, the reason that Matthew said it was 33 is because 3 is the number of the Trinity. And so 33 has a certain theological resonance because 3 and 3 is 33. Hold on. And then I would come around and say, well, the reason the other guy said 34 is actually 3 plus 4 is 7. God made the world in 7 days. 7 is known to be a number fraught with theological significance. And I'm saying...
How many times do you do that symbol, you know, the 666 symbol?
This is basically... Alex BS.
Dinesh, the gospel writers tell us that's why it happened. They say that the reason the family went to Egypt was to fulfill the prophecy of Hosea.
Okay, and so
in other words, if the gospel writer, and now imagine that the gospel writers had written what you just said. Imagine in the actual text, one of them said he was 33 when he died because of the number 3 and its significance.
Correct.
And another said that he was 34 because of the number 4 and its significance. That would be a contradiction, and in that instance, not just a historical contradiction, but a spiritual and theological one too.
Actually, no, it actually wouldn't.
Oh, see it. Come on.
It wouldn't. I'll tell you why.
You don't think that's a contradiction?
No, it's not a contradiction at all, because the gospel writers are constantly
contradicting each other.
No, drawing.
Yeah.
Not contradicting each other.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference, but I think I want to be careful about what I say about what the difference is, because I gotta think it through a little bit more. But yeah, there's definitely a difference. You're right.
If they were constantly contradicting each other, you wouldn't have spent half an hour on a single event that, frankly, I haven't even heard of. In fact, no one's ever heard of. I've never ever heard anyone discuss this in any context. So
which event?
This prophecy about Hosea. I'll go back and look at all this. But what I'm trying to get at is, if you had a plethora of contradictions, you wouldn't be spending the entire debate on one that I'm sure no one in the audience has heard of either.
Hold on.
But oh well, so okay, you've heard of it. Probably because you've been listening to his YouTube channel, right?
You don't think that this is a highly discussed point of contention in the gospel?
Look, is it highly discussed? Have you ever heard that as a contradiction? Have you ever heard that in your life? No, neither have I. And I'm telling you, man, all you have to do is type it into Google. If you guys type it into Google right now, you'll see like all these apologists talking about why that's not a contradiction. and it doesn't even look. All you can do is read the two stories. There's no contradiction. It's just that one is telling certain parts of the story, another person is telling other parts of the story. There's no contradiction. They have to. The mere fact that one person doesn't tell something out of the story doesn't prove there's a contradiction, right? If Matthew said they went to Egypt and they did not go to Jerusalem, then that would be a contradiction. But he didn't say that. He just didn't tell that part of the story because that's not relevant to what he's trying to say. So
the flight to Egypt and its contradiction with
the flight to Egypt. Look, the flight to Egypt is an important event in the gospel. I'm not saying.
Dinesh, also, you said, why could you only bring up this one example? Take your pick. The date of Jesus' crucifixion, whether they're to take a staff or not to take a staff, the dating of Jesus flipping the tables at the temple, Mary Magdalene and what she says at the tomb, when the temple curtain rips. In the Gospel of Luke, it says that this happens before Jesus' death, and in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, it says that it happens afterwards. Like, we can go through any of these contradictions that you like, but the problem is that what you're going to tell me is that it's trivial, and then when I try to explain that it's not trivial, you say, "Oh, well, I haven't even heard of it, and no one else really cares about this." When other people do, by the way, this is a highly discussed point of contention in the gospel. All I'm asking you to do is say that this is. When I mentioned the staff in my opening statement, and I said that whether or not they take a staff is a totally trivial contradiction. I'm not bothered by that. If I were a Christian, I would say, yeah, of course, because the texts are not going to perfectly accord. But for some reason, Augustine could not accept this, and so comes up with this ludicrous idea of a literal staff and a metaphorical staff that Jesus is talking about. If you were willing to just
wait, what's staff?
Heard of it, and no one else really cares about this. When other people do, by the way, this is a highly discussed point of contention in the gospel. Wow. All I'm asking you to do is say that this is. When I mentioned the staff in my opening statement, and I said that whether or not they take a staff is a totally trivial contradiction. I'm not bothered by that. If I were a Christian, I would say, yeah, of course, because the texts are not going to perfectly accord. But for some reason, Augustine could not accept this, and so comes up with this ludicrous idea of a literal staff and a metaphorical staff that Jesus is talking about. If you were willing to just say, yes, this is a contradiction, but that doesn't upset the method of Christianity, I think it would be a much more defensible and respectable approach. But instead, it seems that you're unwilling to admit that there's even a single contradiction in these texts.
Okay. So, I don't know. I just want to look at some of the things he was saying.
Luke says that after...
Because he says something about, the staff thing, I've heard that one before. I think it's in Luke 10. Let's take a look at some of the stuff in the Bible. Give me 1 sec. And then, I don't want it to get too late, but there's a ton of stuff I want to do, but I don't know if we're going to run out of time here. But let me just, because I got to see this thing about, where did he say? He says Luke talked about the veil being ripped before his death. And then he says that the other gospel writers said it at the moment of his death, which is correct. I mean, it's correct about them. I don't know what Luke says. As they led him away, Simon of Cyrene, okay. Malefactors were there. Jesus forgive them, for they know not what they do. People stood beholding, the rulers with them, derided him. King of the Jews. One of the malefactors railed at him, the other rebuking. We indeed justly. Jesus, Lord, remember when thou comest. Okay. Verily, thou shalt be with me in paradise. 6th hour, darkness, sun darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. All right. So this is, okay. Luke 23:45. The veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And that would be, yes, he's correct. It happens in Matthew after Jesus dies. Oh, sorry. Jesus, when he cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. All right, so what I would suggest to you is that, okay, let's see this. The sun was darkened, the veil of the temple was rent in the midst, and when Jesus cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands. So this is look, I mean, you can decide what you want. We want to think about this. Luke says it in verse 45, and then in verse 46, Jesus dies, right? Matthew says that Jesus dies in verse 50, and then in verse 51, the veil of the temple was rent in twain. Okay, now you may suggest that, oh, this means that it happened right after he died, but it doesn't say that. It says that it was rent in twain. It was. All right. It doesn't tell us the exact moment or that it happened right then, right at this moment. It says that it was rent in twain. And Luke says the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. Rent is torn, midst is like the middle. But this is not once again not a contradiction, okay? Because I don't think Matthew's not telling you the exact moment that it happened. He's just saying that that's what happened. That's what that occurred. So it was all within a few minutes of the time when Jesus died. This happened. The earth did quake. The rocks rent. All right. Luke doesn't really talk about the earthquake, I guess, or maybe he does. Yeah. There was darkness, darkened, veil of the temple ripped, centurion. All the people came together. Anyway, so that's not a contradiction. Whatever. So dumb.
Okay. I'm studying the Bible in Toronto. 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 Studying the Bible with Mike, Sam, Pat. These other YouTubers are just so trash. Hit the thumbs up if you want to support. Go follow Mike as he follows the Lord. I'm studying the Bible in Toronto. 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 You better watch out, Mike's calling out the shields. If you're not free grace, you need to sit down and chill. We're not hyper grace, you know we keep it real. Eternally secure, you know that we're sealed. We don't back low, we're not workspace heretics. Mike's not in it for the money, trying to get a lick. They out here selling their souls for a couple clicks. Becoming Freemasons so they can't just get rich. I'm studying the Bible in Toronto. 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 Shout out to Mike, Sam, Pat. Check out his channel, Toronto Bible Study. Subscribe and like.